Okay, so we're here today because a few months ago, Leica announced they were going to reintroduce the M6 body as a brand new film camera option at a retail price of $5,300 US, equating to about 7,000 Canadian dollars. King's ransom for something that was originally introduced in 1984, no matter which currency you want to use. So, and I'm not really sure why the Leica would reintroduce the M6 as opposed to the M7, but maybe because the M6 is all mechanical, maybe that has something to do with it. But I had an opportunity to borrow a friend's M6, the 0.72 viewfinder, and I thought it would be interesting to do a shootout between my grandfather's old Leica 3C, my M2, and the M6. And honestly, it was really hard to do this because I spent so much time thinking about the images that they produce. But of course, the images are a product of the lens, not of the camera body. And what about the camera body? Why use one over the other? Is the new Leica body really worth it? I mean, there's been some innovation in the last 75 or 80 years, but we're shooting film here, so it's not like there's any kind of a major technological advance from one to the next. Anyway, okay, so grandfather's 3C, grandfather's camera, of course, so it's the best one. And this is old school Oscar Barnack. It has two windows, one for the rangefinder, one for viewing. It has a little adjustment, so you can adjust your focus underneath the rewind knob here. So you only get one set of frame lines for a 50mm lens, which this one has. Film advances via a knob, so as the film rewind. Slow shutter speeds are on a separate dial from the other regular shutter speeds, up to 1/500th of, no, 1/1000th of a second. Sorry, need my glasses for that. Leica thread mount, so you have a 39mm thread mount on the camera. Loading is via basically a dark art. You need to open the bottom here, and it actually shows you on the bottom the length of leader you need to pull out in terms of how long of a leader you need to be in order to fit it onto this very challenging, we'll hope I didn't do anything there. Anyway, very challenging spool. So, oh, it was cocked, that's all. Okay, anyway, all good. So, next up is, put that back. Okay, so next up is my M2. I bought this from a fellow photographer a few years ago, one of the many vanity cameras I purchased over the years. It actually has a Luigi Cressini case, which costs an absolute fortune. Italian made, very nice. It gives it a real vintage feel. But we're talking about the body, of course, not the lens. I'll take the lens off. Leica M mount now on the lens, only 3 frame lines. In an integrated viewfinder, it had the 35, the 50, and the 90. But there's some other major advances. Your film advance, of course, now is a lever as opposed to the knob. You've got all your shutter speeds are on a single dial, which is really nice. The loading the camera, loading the film, requires the same base plate comes off. In fact, Leica loves their base plates. They kept doing this even through to the digital cameras. But now you actually have a little door, so you can fit the film through onto the rails and in front of the shutter with a lot more accuracy, which is nice. Same rewind spool, which is kind of annoying to say the least, but major improvements and a really nice camera. Now, this camera, of course, is so Leica's numbering is really weird. So after the 3, this is the 3C. So after the 3F, they moved to the M3, which was this camera with a slightly different viewfinder and a little window so you could see your frame advance, as well as a couple of other minor changes. But they made the M2 to be a less expensive version of the M3, and then they did the M1, and then the M4, the M5, and then the M6. So that's kind of odd. But regardless, moving from the M2 to the M6, it's exactly the same as the M2. I mean, seriously, it's actually okay. It's more like an M3 because it does have the little window for the viewfinder. But there's a rudimentary light meter in it. They changed a couple of things. The only major improvement, well, the 2 major improvements. One is the rewind goes from the Leica M2 knob, which is just like the Leica 3, to a crank. And then same viewfinder, they added a 28mm frame line, and they did make a fairly major advancement with the film loading. So we go from, we still have the door, but rather than having a cassette that you pull out, you have a three-pronged take-up spool where you just shove the film through and crank it over. But I have to say that the fact that I don't know when the M2 was built, probably, I don't know, back in the 1960s, and the M3 was, this M3 was, or I'm sorry, this M6 was built in, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s. The difference between this and this is surprisingly limited. I mean, when you think about a Nikon F, for instance, in the F2 and the F3 and the F4 and 5 and 6, I mean, Nikon had film loading technology that was infinitely superior to this way back when this camera was around, let alone when this camera was around. And I can't help but wonder if the film loading and not having a film door, I'm sure there's a reason for it. I don't know what that reason is, but what I do know is that it's really painful. And I also know that you can actually get a little aftermarket crank, winding crank for your M2 if you really want it. And I also know that the light meter in the M6 is pretty good, but you can buy yourself, you know, a little, you know, Lime, you know, off of Kickstarter, Lime 1 meter or any of a number of other meters, and it's just, you know, that problem is then solved. So, yeah, so I don't really know exactly what's going on here with the M6 or what went on with the M6, but it's a worthy successor, but only because it's the same thing. So they offered a 28mm frame line in the M6, but of course the M2, the key is with the 28mm, all you have to do is just look at the outside edge of your viewfinder, and that gives you roughly 28mm. But that's about the entirety of the changes they made between these two cameras over the course of, I don't know, 30 years. And there's two possibilities for this. One is that Leica got lazy. The other is that they just had no interest in messing with perfection. So I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. But you know, but other camera systems progressed, I feel, quite a bit faster than Leica did between the M2 and the M6. And you know, the difference between the 3C and the M2 is amazing. They completely rebuilt the camera. They changed it from being rather cumbersome to being relatively, actually surprisingly easy to use. But I still like shooting with the 3C. I actually like the magnified viewfinder. It makes it easy to focus. You know, but the difference between the M2 and the M6 is a rewind knob and the ability to load the film a little bit faster. And I guess, you know, yeah, there's a light meter, but like I said before, that is easily solved. But we did take all three of them out for a run around the neighborhood and just took some photos, loaded them up with, I can't remember, some T-Max 100, I think, and just tried them out. And, you know, and all three of them behaved really well. I mean, the shutter, thankfully, these have all been rebuilt, and the shutter is working properly, which is really nice. And really, I mean, it is a lot of fun to go and shoot with any of these three cameras. But you know, even though I want one of the new cameras, if I had to choose one, it would be the M2, because it's mine and I love it. But also, you know, I would love to have the new M6, but I honestly, I just, you know, I can't rationalize spending that much money on a camera when something like this is a third the price. So with that said, I'm sure that I'm going to hear all kinds of things from all kinds of keen Leica shooters. But as far as I'm concerned, you know, that's sort of where I landed with these three cameras. And thanks for watching. And, you know, go and find yourself something, you know, something vintage.